I'm going to get started. Welcome to this week's Croud Academy Live. And today we're going to be talking about key stages of the localization life cycle. And if you have any questions throughout it, feel free to just drop them in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. Just a bit of agenda for you. So to begin with, I'll talk about the three stages that we feel of the localization cycle, and then we'll do a quick poll to understand where you think that you are in that stage. We'll talk about creative and design, content, global user experience, accuracy and consistency, all in relation to localizations. Today, you'll be hearing from myself, Alice Wilkinson, Senior Project Manager here at Croud. And also we have...
Hello, I'm Georgina Lake and I am the Project Manager of the localization team at Croud. Cool, so we're going to kick off with a couple of localization fails, shall we say, to start with, sort of frame what we're going to talk about and why it's so important. This one you might recognise, so it's from Pepsi. They ran a global marketing campaign and unfortunately it fell a little bit short in Taiwan when they translated their slogan from "Come Alive with Pepsi Generation," and that translated unfortunately into "Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the dead." So not a great one from them. And we've got another one. So this one is really recent. This was actually from last week. So an IKEA store in Bahrain had a banner on the side of the store. It was all about getting a good night's sleep. But unfortunately, it was a little bit different. This one actually didn't really get translated at all. And it read as same text, but in Arabic. Now, the IKEA team were really, really quick to react. It's IKEA, it's what they do. And they turned it around into a bit more of a guerrilla marketing campaign. But obviously, you can imagine yourself being part of the team dealing with the fallout from either of these two and the amount of money and sort of stress that it would have caused. And obviously that's why localization is so important, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Cool. So just to frame the context and bigger picture for anyone who is just generally interested in the localization and globalization of their business, it is actually a challenge that we face every single day, but it's understanding and embracing each locale and its nuances individually that helps us overcome this challenge and succeed. I'm going to discuss the next few slides what we feel are the three stages of the localization cycle, and then we'll run a quick poll where you can decide where you think your business or your client's business currently sits within its global reach. And at the very end of the session as well, we'll do a re-poll and you can answer the same question and see if it changes from anything that you've learned today. So, where do you think you are? The first stage is expanding into new markets. So you haven't done anything yet, you're just within the market that you currently sit in. Second stage is you've got all the basics done. Your website's localized, but you need some advice on what steps to take next. And then you've got the final stage where you've done all your research and everything's localized, and you just need some guidance on how to optimize and your market presence through local insights. So just delving into each one of these sections a little bit more. Stage one, you're successful in your home market, wherever that may be. You're ready to take the next steps. So the kinds of things that you'll be thinking about is how can you scale up your services? Which market should be your first priority? How will your brand be perceived? And should you even adapt your products to suit the locale? So the kinds of things that you can do to answer these questions is look into some market insights into the competitors and what they're doing in those particular markets. Look at the trends and behaviours within those markets. Run a brand perception survey. Have they heard of your brand? Is it something that maybe you should do a brand awareness campaign before you even begin to start reaching out? Look at your website and your copy and your digital copy and develop it to ensure that it's localised. And then also looking at your tone of voice as a whole, because you want to always have the same brand voice across all markets, but you will need to localize it, tweak it to make sure that that brand voice comes across the same. And then we've got stage two, where all your basics are done, your site is translated, you know where you want to break into, you've done that kind of research, but you also need some practical feedback and some guidance, to help you develop your online presence, to make sure it's locally appealable and get traction in those particular markets. So the kinds of things that you'd be thinking about now or experiencing, the market you're in now, is it not growing as well as you expected? The localization, is it consistent? Is it accurate? Is it contextual to the locale? Is your product and brand actually appealing within that market? The content suit the locale? Is your digital marketing localized? And does your digital marketing even suit the locale? So some things to hear so that will help you guide to answer these questions is looking at the quality of the localizations and develop it. Looking at the product descriptions, are they suitable for the market? Are they calling out the particular things that resonate with people in that market? Looking at the audience appeal and engagement, and also making sure that your digital marketing campaigns are localized, because you need to be able to get them to your website. And then we have the final stage, whereas you've nailed all the basics and more, you're doing okay in the markets that you've broken into, but you want to understand more how you can increase your trust, increase your visibility by optimizing your content, whether it be online or offline. And this is where you kind of need to understand more about the market and the audience that you're targeting specifically. So you could be thinking about how can you engage or even re-engage with your audience. So when you broke into that market, was it working really well, and then all of a sudden it's starting to tail off? Why is that? Are your competitors more appealing? Have they got better price points, better messaging? What is the site and in-store experience like to a consumer in that market? What do the consumers in the market really think about your brand? Is it positive? Is it negative? Have they even heard of you? So the kinds of things that you can be looking to improve and optimize your site is by looking at competitor monitoring. What are they doing on different platforms? What are they doing for email marketing? What are they doing on the social media? Is it mirroring what you're doing? Is it better suited to what you're doing? Looking at the trends and insights, what actually resonates with that particular market. And then you can do things like user site audits and mystery shoppers, getting people to visit your physical stores even, to make sure that everything's working as it should do within those markets, suiting people going in. And then again, we can have a look at brand perception surveys. So with all that information and feedback, you can take from that, and you can optimize what you're doing to improve everything. So now that I've run through all those 3 stages, we want to open the poll. So you can either be sat in the first one, which is thinking about expanding into new markets. The second one, the basics are done, but what are next? Or the third one, you know your markets and you're already localized. How do you optimize? So yeah, so we'll just give you a few seconds, 30 seconds to answer that. And then we're going to dive into each of these sections with Georgina. So yeah, do you want to get started?
Cool. So, and we'll publish the results in a second as well. So yeah, I'm going to break down, or start breaking down, some of the different areas of the localization challenge for you. And the first up is creative imagery and design. So when you first start to think about localization, when we first start to think about localization, you probably don't immediately go to content first. Imagery and design first. You probably think about content. See, I'm doing it myself. But different audiences in different locales have different culture, different points of reference, and that will even affect how they relate to your imagery and your creative on your website and in your campaigns. So often what we see is it gets overlooked a little bit, again, because of that like immediate thing. When you're new to localization, you tend to concentrate on the content straight away. But it is important to develop your own visual tone of voice as much as you would have a tone of voice for your content per market. And the reason behind that is generally because it will improve the conversion rate of your customers and how they relate to your brand. One of the biggest sort of examples I can give you, so there was a global brand that we heard about recently who sell tea, and they are majorly based in Europe, in UK and US. For the UK, they had an advert campaign. They were trying to introduce exactly the same without changing anything out into Brazil. So these adverts featured visuals of, you know, average day-to-day Brit coming home, putting on the kettle, having a cup of tea, having a biscuit, having a chat with their friends and family. Like, makes sense in the context of the UK, you know, as a Brit, great. But out in Brazil, not so much, and it really didn't hit home, and it took a while for them to realise why, and their competitors were taking advantage of that. And the reason why, because Brazil, they see tea in a much more spiritual context, so it's much more health and well-being. It is a ritual, but in a very different context, and that's how much of a big impact that can have, and it's very easily to get overlooked. So when you're thinking about your own creative and wondering like where you are at the moment, kind of questions you want to ask yourself is, does your creative spark joy for your audience? And if it doesn't, do you know why? Is there any branding at the moment or creative that you're treating as generic across multiple markets? And if you are, like, do you know if it's actually performing? Is it actually able for your audiences to relate to it or not? So next up, we've got some do's and don'ts. So you're going to see some very similar do's and don'ts throughout each section. So apologies for that, but they are very important, and that's kind of the reason why we feature them a lot. So as a do, be wary of gestures and poses in your images. So if you are a luxury brand selling clothing, for example, and you've got models and you've got hero imagery, what's actually going on in that image? Have you got models making poses or visual gestures? You know, thumbs up mean different things to different people in different markets. You know, we know that because we're in the business of localization, but a lot of people don't, and they forget about it. Have you got location imagery for your sort of campaigns for a new launch? What sort of location and landmarks have you got behind your models in that imagery? Is it going to be easy for the people in that market to relate, or is it going to be a little bit jarring because they can't identify with it? Maybe you're using stock photography, which is also fine. It's a nice, like, relatively cheap way around doing this. But look at all the details in the imagery when you're selecting what you're going to use. Make sure that you haven't got something else in there that, again, is going to make it very obvious that it's not been made bespoke for them. Whether that be a different location in the background, that's a city landscape that they go, no, I don't recognise that, or different language in the background, maybe on a whiteboard or a blackboard, for example. So just generally do question, like, is it relevant? Have you done your research? Are you sure that it's not going to cause any issue or maybe any potential offence? And as a general rule, like, try and keep things neutral. One of our do's is try and avoid drastic use of certain colours. Like, black is normally used for mourning in some countries, but not in others. And if you don't know, you could be relaying the wrong message to them. And generally, yeah, just don't make any assumptions if you can avoid it. So next up, we've got an example. So you'll see on your left, you've got the original version of a site, and then on your right, you've got the new. And essentially what happened here was just a local consultation process where we spoke with the local audience and they gave us feedback. We tested that, and this is obviously the change and the massive impact that it had. So 107% conversion rate increase. But if you look at the two versions, there really isn't that much difference between them. It's very small changes. So in terms of if you were thinking about doing this process, the cost is not perhaps going to be as high as you first thought. So that's imagery and design. Now we're going to move on to content. So content definitely is what you probably first think of when you think of localization. But often what we see a lot of is content gets directly translated. And that can be really a problem when you're talking about idioms or modern turns of phrases, something like in contemporary language, like dress like a boss. Just when that's directly translated, really literally word for word, just doesn't make sense and potentially just delivers the wrong message or gets misinterpreted. Obviously the ideal goal would be to have bespoke content, and you can do that in a couple of ways. You can have something literally written from scratch by an in-market copywriter, probably is the best approach if you've done lots of research, or you can make sure that you've done your research but you're still adapting original copy that you've got from another base language. Both are great, but much better probably than a direct translation. And why is it important? Again, it just goes back to, like, different culture, different markets have different culture. So what's trending and what your audience is actually interested in Maybe they're more interested or find sustainability really important. If you've got imagery, for example, or content that doesn't address that correctly, then they're not gonna engage with it as much. And possibly they've got different music interests and totally different influences. If you've got an influencer campaign, for example, are they going to actually relate to the people in that campaign or not? So questions to ask yourself about your own content to try and work out where you are. Like, do you really know who your audience is and how different are they? And what changes have you made to your content to date to try and, you know, fit in with them? And are you confident that that local audience really will relate to that content or not? And I think then we've got some more do's and don'ts. So write for that local audience, definitely write for that local audience. And one of the ways that you can do that is, hopefully you've already got brand tone of voice developed, but you can adapt that per market. So you can have a very specific brand tone of voice per market, per language, that explains clearly to whoever's going to write your copy, whether you're doing it in-house or you've got an agency doing it for you, that tone of voice is delivered consistently. So are they talking in an informal or formal approach? You know, we know that in German that's literally going to change the nouns that are used. And have they got a glossary of terms, you know, ways that you want your brand to be spoken about or not spoken about? And just generally always plan ahead, especially with content, and it goes hand in hand with a few of these different don'ts. So try not to make assumptions, try not to rush into the translation process and work with aggressive deadlines. It ultimately means that what you're going to get at the end is going to be a much higher quality piece of work, and we always try and work in very careful QA processes into what we do to avoid that as a result. And then we've got another example to show you. So proof of concept of content. This was a piece of content that was originally written in UK-based English, but the subject matter of the content was very specific and quite unique. It had to include information about a very unique, specific location, travel information, what's around in the area, food, drink, parks nearby, all sorts of things. But in order to capture that information, the initial copywriters were UK English. And if you think about yourself as an individual doing research about a location, you know, online, doing searches, you're probably going to struggle because the information is only going to be available in that native language. So it's just about thinking about that process ahead of. If you're writing specific location information, for example, just like this, do you need to get somebody native local to do that research first? What's actually going into that content? And I think then the next slide is I'm going to hand over back to Alice.
Yeah, so the next section is all about global user experience. So localizing your content is only step one. You have to always also consider the technical aspects within your content or within your website or within your marketing. And those kind of things like currencies and the way that they're formatted, dates, addresses, the way that they're formatted. I mean, if you look at UK English and American English, I can't even say it, American English, and the way the dates are formatted are quite different. Things like measurements for clothing or for shoes, or the metric system, what kind of metric system do they use? Do they have a chat service? The policies and the FAQs that you have on site, these will all be quite specific to specific markets. So these kind of research needs to be done prior and make sure that it's correct for each of your markets. These are often overlooked because, as Georgina said, people always think about content first, but this is part of the content. And people usually overlook it because it's a lack of technical knowledge, not realizing that these things do make a difference. These things are really important because you can lose customers. You can lose customers, like, for example, I was talking about the dates. It can confuse you. You think you're going to get it 1 month and you're going to get it another month, or the dates just don't make sense. And also things like a payment stage. You can lose customers just at the very point when they're about to buy something. And that's because their preferable payment method of payment isn't there. It could be credit card, it could be debit card, it could be PayPal, it could be a wallet. Or there are some countries that would prefer to pay on delivery and pay out the door. It's just you need to know these things just to ensure that you're not going to lose people at that particular stage. To ensure that you have all these things localized and correct for each market only increases the engagement and the trust and the credibility of your brand overall, so which is why they're really important. So the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about is how much you actually already know about that market. Do you know what the payment methods are for that market, the popular ones? Do you know how the dates should be formatted? Do you know, for example, different languages, you read right to left, others read left to right. So if you took that into account with the whole design, how everything is appearing on your site. Also, do you know about the legal and the regulatory framework for your market? The difference in refunds or VAT or delivery. I mean, some of the big ones like legal things, if they're incorrect for your market, you could face some things that aren't so great for your business. So it's good to ensure that, you know, all these are correct for your market. And then again, we have some do's and don'ts similar to the other sections in regards to like the user experience. So I mentioned like the chat service. So if your website offers a chat service, which is great, we've all been browsing, you see a chat pop up, hi, how can we help you? But if that's not in your native language, it's not really going to resonate with you and probably like, oh, that's not so great. And maybe just try and find maybe more of a local site that sells the same thing. And that goes the same for local contact information. There are some markets that will prefer to be able to phone up the business or the company that they're buying from or the service that they want to speak to. So if it's not a local one, they might go, oh, okay, that's abroad, I'll just go and find another one. And again, so you're losing, it has an impact on your traffic, impact on your conversion rate. And then the other things I've mentioned previously about the date and currency formats, make sure they're all correct. The payment method, again, you don't want to lose them at point of sale. Ensuring that you don't cause confusion when it comes to sizing, and that can be anything like clothing, shoes, lingerie, or even like if you're selling a table, the metric sizing they're using, is it centimeters, inches, feet, yards? Depends on the market, you never know. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you do research the cultural preferences in regards to all these kind of technical aspects. And moving on to the don'ts, again, assume comes up a lot. So don't assume your target customers, they're all of the same group of people, because they're not. Don't think that one size fits all, because they really don't. Using the same terms and conditions, like I said, and policies, like I said, this could affect you legally, as it may differ per market. And also don't partially localize, don't ignore the date, measurements and other variables, because it just makes your content look unprofessional and you lose credibility. Yeah, and so I've got a bit of an example. It's just a small example of part from a blog for a footwear, and you can see that we've got the UK sizing in there, which is size 15 and size 8.5, which to a German person, which you see is localized underneath, wouldn't make any sense. And the technical aspects are localized into European size guide. And the links also on that would be localized to ensure that they are taking you to the right place to be able to find out the right sizing for your feet in those particular markets. Cool. And then moving on to accuracy and consistency. So this is what builds confidence in your brand. And without it, you may struggle to actually establish a strong relationship with a new consumer base or with an existing consumer base. So typically, people rely on web searches, as Georgina touched on before, to provide local information. If this isn't correct, it would leave a bad impression, which obviously is what you don't want. And then also assuming that there are no nuances within a language. So this is like localizing per language rather than per market. For example, Dutch, we've got Belgian Dutch and Netherlands Dutch. They are very different. And that's why it's important to know to localize into the language rather than the market. And there are other languages where there's slight differences, like we have Swiss German and German in Germany, where there are slight differences in spelling and grammar or different words used. And these may seem very small to like, oh, it's German, it's German, but it's not actually German or Swiss German. So that'll be massively huge to a native speaker. So that's why it's really important to think about those tiny nuances within the languages. Also, people tend to forget about the tone of voice and say, oh, it's just my tone of voice, it's my brand, it's my messaging, that's why I want to come across. But this needs to be localized to ensure that you don't alienate your target audience. So as there's different forms of addresses in multiple languages, and if you don't state whether it's formal or informal, you might get a mix of informal and formal written in your localized content, which obviously wouldn't look great either, because people are just going to be a bit confused. And also you may actually just even targeting the wrong audience. You may be addressing people formally when your target audience is a lot younger. And then people obviously also forget to localize everything on their website instead of just localizing the prior. Start that sentence again. People don't always localize everything on their website. They localize just what they feel is the priority content and ignoring some of the other things, which again isn't so great. I mean, great, yeah, you've got some of it done, the most important bits, but recently we did some market insights where a native expert in that market was saying, well, yeah, it's great, but half of it isn't localized into traditional Chinese, it remains in English. And yeah, a lot of people speak English, but it doesn't look great. It doesn't resonate with that target audience. It should all be in the language that you're targeting, just in order to build the confidence within that market. Okay, and then we've got some more do's and don'ts. So yeah, we've got do, ensure any local information is up to date. Make sure your tone of voice is tweaked to suit the market. Get those insights from the native experts, because it's just invaluable. And then consider the main spoken languages for that market. So touched upon the differences between Dutch and Belgium and Netherlands Dutch, but also there are markets out there that have got multiple languages per market. So we've got Austria, Switzerland, Belgium, they've all got multiple languages per market. So you need to take that into consideration. What is the main spoken language? Is it a consideration that you get all of the market, all of the languages localized and have different domains for all of those? And then we've got some don'ts, which is like, don't rush into the translation or wait until the last second. Put the same effort into each market. Treat them individually if you want to succeed. Don't partially localize your site or digital marketing. Make sure it's all localized. Use the same tone of voice. That sounds a bit, don't use the same tone of voice. Well, you are using the same voice, but make sure that it's tweaked to make sure your brand message stays the same across all markets. And yeah, and don't think one language fits all markets, because it doesn't. Okay, so here's a proof of concept. So this was a PPC ad where you can see they're both in English, but we've got US English and UK English, and you can see to begin with, they're both targeting in UK English. And once we took the UK English and slightly changed it, which you can see as the highlighted sections, which is holidays for vacations, inquiry for inquiry, it actually made a massive difference, because 21% difference increase in engagement, which is quite a large increase by just changing a few words, because it's resonating and sat better with the US market, US target market. Cool. And then similar to the beginning, I've got a few examples of big brands just localizing, well, literally translating and not getting it right. So we've got HSBC. They got Assume Nothing translated into multiple languages, and it became Do Nothing, which wasn't so great. And it actually cost them $10 million to correct that, which probably would have made more sense to put the time and the research in first to see if it would localize well and resonate well in those markets beforehand. We've got Ford, aim to highlight high quality manufacturing, but in Belgium it didn't go down so well, because it translated to every car has a high quality corpse, which probably was a bit humorous to read, but probably didn't invoke the image that they actually wanted to. Oh, and then now that comes to the end. Georgina?
Yeah, so those are some really eye-watering examples, but hopefully they've really you understand why we showed them. You may have seen them before as well. So we're going to run the poll again now, so hopefully that should pop up in a second, just to see as we ran through those areas in more detail, see if you actually changed where you thought you currently sat or not. If not, that's also fine. I'm just going to quickly run through what those were again. So just quickly top level. So if you're expanding into new markets, you probably haven't changed your opinion. You're probably still there, raring to go, I know. But the areas that you want to probably focus on, if you're there, local research, insights, and developing that tone of voice. If you're at the second stage, so you're ready to now evaluate your performance, just make sure that you have done everything correctly. We know it might come across as like we're adding an extra step, but it is so important that you do that you go back and check for all those reasons that we've just said, in case you've missed anything. Really make sure that everything has been done consistently, so you're ready to move on to the next bit. And then maybe the last one, you're ready to optimize your market, so you're up here, like you're the best possible place really. You're happy with your content, you're happy with what you've got, but now you're ready to really optimize it and to keep going with it. So obviously trends and what people are interested in, your audience, that will keep changing, so you need to, per market, keep doing that research and keep adapting to what's going on. So we do things like competitor monitoring and check on what they're doing, and brand perception surveys and those sorts of things for you. Cool. So shortly, if you're all finished up with saying that, we'll publish the poll so you can have a look. And then just to round up really, so general top level do's and don'ts. Sorry if it sounds like we're repeating ourselves, but you'd be surprised, like we have this so much, and it's really important. So it's things like do your research first, test it, make sure there's no sort of additional bias in there, and then roll it out and confirm it and get those results for yourselves. Try and avoid a one-fits-all approach if you can. There's always like ways around it, but always check yourself. And it goes back to the next one, which is don't make assumptions. So if you're saving yourself a bit of time and resource, back with the stock photography or reusing content that you've already got, that's great, but just don't assume it will hit home. Do that research and adapt it if it needs to be. And then last one, come to us, cheeky plug, but if you'd like any help, any advice at all, our email is on the next slide. We're here for advice in general, whether that's specific for projects or anything at all. We'd be happy to help. Cool, okay. Should we have a look and see if you have any questions at all? If you can see the Q&A bit down the bottom, if you haven't submitted a question yet, feel free, and then we'll try and answer them for you.
Yeah, I can see there's a couple in there. I can take the first one if you want, Georgina.
Yeah, sure.
So which languages do you localise into? So the answer to that question is, well, all of them. Found a language that we can't do yet. So yeah.
Cool. I'll take the other one then. I can see another one. So do you use any kind of translation tools or software? So yes, we do. We use a tool that you may have heard of with SDL Trados Studio. We do use it as part of our localization process, but only part of. So we have native speakers who both edit and review and then review again the work. For us, the QA stage is really important, and we want to make sure it's manual so that we don't miss anything. Obviously, we know these tools are really great, but they still can't quite help with the context. They're great for the speed and efficiency, but don't always pick up on the context. So that's what we do for our process.
So have you got multiple linguists in-house? So we do have multiple linguists in-house. We've got varying from all different languages, and even within our own team. But we do have Croud have got a model, a Crowdy model, where we use freelancers all under NDA. They're native to the specific markets, and so we outsource work to them to ensure that everything is correct and as should be for in those particular markets.
Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. So unless anyone wants to fire one in, we can call it a day, but please do feel free to get in touch and ask anything if anything comes to mind later on.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you, bye.